Marcus Thornfield's weathered hands froze on the binoculars, his morning coffee tumbling from numb fingers as he spotted the massive form thrashing in Flathead River's churning waters. The 800-pound Kodiak bear wasn't swimming, it was drowning, weighed down by something metallic glinting around its thick neck. This wasn't natural. Bears don't wear collars. His neighbor's scream pierced the Montana air as she witnessed the same horrifying sight from her cabin porch, her breakfast plate shattering against wooden planks. The sound echoed across the valley like a gunshot, sending ravens exploding from nearby pines in black waves of panic. Marcus remembered his late wife Sarah's gentle voice. "Every creature deserves a fighting chance, Marcus." But this magnificent animal had maybe minutes before the current claimed it forever, and the icy rapids had already killed 2 experienced rafters this season. "God help me," he whispered, already sprinting toward the riverbank. What kind of monster puts a death collar on a wild bear, and why was it happening in his backyard? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months before that terrifying morning at Flathead River, Marcus Thornfield had been a different man. At 65, the retired veterinarian shuffled through his days in a fog of grief, his modest cabin overlooking Glacier National Park feeling more like a tomb than a home. The silence was the hardest part. No more Sarah humming while she made coffee, no more her gentle laughter filling the rooms they'd shared for 38 years. Sarah had lost her battle with lung cancer 2 years ago, and Marcus blamed himself for not catching it sooner. A veterinarian who'd spent 40 years saving animals, yet couldn't save the woman he loved most. The irony ate at him like acid. Her medical bills had drained their retirement savings, leaving Marcus surviving on a meager pension that barely covered his own heart medication. Some nights, he'd sit in her favorite chair, whispering to her photograph, "What kind of world are we leaving behind, sweetheart?" The estrangement from their daughter Jennifer cut deepest of all. She lived in Seattle now, a successful environmental lawyer raising 12-year-old Emma alone after her divorce. But Jennifer couldn't forgive Marcus for what she called his disappearing act after Sarah's funeral. The truth was more complicated. Marcus had thrown himself into volunteer work at the local wildlife rehabilitation center, unable to bear the empty house where every corner held memories of his wife. "Dad, some wounds don't heal just because time passes," Jennifer had said during their last phone call 6 months ago. Her voice carried the same stubborn edge Sarah used to get when she was hurt. Marcus had wanted to explain that he wasn't running away from them. He was running towards something that might give his life meaning again. But the words wouldn't come, and the call ended in familiar silence. The real blow came when Marcus discovered what Jennifer didn't know. He'd been anonymously paying down Sarah's remaining medical debt, sending every spare dollar to the hospital billing department. His own heart medication had to be rationed, pills cut in half to make the prescription last. "A man's worth is measured by what he leaves behind," his own father used to say, and Marcus was determined to leave his family free of debt, even if it killed him. His days now followed a rigid pattern: morning walks through the park, afternoon maintenance work at the wildlife center, evenings spent reading Sarah's favorite books aloud to her empty chair. The rangers knew him as the quiet widower who showed up early and stayed late, gentle with injured animals in a way that suggested deep personal understanding of pain. Marcus had no idea that his solitary routine was about to collide with forces beyond his imagination. He didn't know that 300 miles away in Seattle, Jennifer was building a legal case against a company whose environmental crimes might have contributed to Sarah's death. And he certainly couldn't have predicted that his expertise with wounded animals would soon put him at the center of a conspiracy that reached from the pristine wilderness of Montana to the dark markets of international wildlife trafficking. But fate was already moving the pieces into place. The morning of July 15th started like any other for Marcus Thornfield. He'd risen before dawn, made coffee in Sarah's favorite mug, and set out for his routine walk along the Flathead River Trail. The summer air carried the scent of pine and wild flowers, and for a moment he could almost hear Sarah's voice telling him to breathe it all in, Marcus. This is what heaven must smell like. That peaceful moment shattered when he spotted the massive form in the water. The Kodiak bear was enormous, easily 800 pounds of muscle and fur, but it moved with the desperate, uncoordinated thrashing of a drowning victim. Marcus raised his binoculars, and his blood ran cold. A thick metal collar encircled the bear's neck, far too heavy for any legitimate research equipment he'd ever seen. The device was dragging the magnificent animal down like an anchor. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathed, his veterinary instincts overriding everything else. This wasn't nature taking its course. This was torture. Without thinking, Marcus kicked off his boots and plunged into the icy rapids. The shock of the water hit his 65-year-old body like a sledgehammer, but 40 years of treating panicked animals had taught him to push through discomfort. The current was stronger than he'd anticipated, and for a terrifying moment, he wondered if he'd just signed his own death warrant. The bear saw him coming and let out a sound Marcus would never forget. Not quite a roar, not quite a whimper, but something heartbreakingly human in its desperation. Those intelligent dark eyes locked onto his, and Marcus saw something that made his chest tighten. The bear was asking for help. "Easy, big fella," Marcus gasped, fighting to stay afloat as he reached the struggling animal. "I'm here to help, not hurt." The collar was worse up close, a brutal contraption of steel and electronics that had clearly been designed to cause suffering. Marcus felt around the mechanism with numb fingers, searching for a release catch while the bear remained eerily still, as if it understood what he was trying to do. There, a hidden latch disguised as part of the collar's bulk. Marcus's veterinary experience with various restraint devices paid off as he managed to spring the mechanism. The collar dropped away into the murky water like a stone, and immediately the bear's movements became more coordinated, but they were both in trouble now. The current had carried them downstream toward a series of rapids that had claimed 2 experienced rafters earlier that season. Marcus felt his strength ebbing, his heart hammering irregularly in his chest. The medication he'd been rationing wasn't enough for this kind of exertion. The bear seemed to sense his distress. In a moment that defied everything Marcus thought he knew about wild animals, the massive creature positioned itself beside him, offering its broad back as support. Together they fought their way to the rocky shore, where Marcus collapsed in exhaustion while the bear lay panting beside him. As his breathing slowly returned to normal, Marcus studied his unlikely companion more carefully. The bear's left ear had a distinctive notch, a mark Marcus recognized with a shock of memory. 15 years ago, he'd treated an orphaned bear cub with an infected ear injury. He'd made that exact notch as an identification mark before releasing the healthy cub back into the wild. "I'll be damned," Marcus whispered. "Dakota? Is that really you?" The bear's response sent chills down Marcus's spine. It gently nuzzled his shoulder, then did something no wild bear should ever do. It rolled onto its back in a submissive gesture, exposing its vulnerable belly. It was the same behavior the cub had shown during treatment all those years ago. Marcus retrieved the collar from the shallows, examining it with growing alarm. This wasn't research equipment. It was far too sophisticated and expensive. The metal housing bore a partially scratched logo that made his blood run cold: Blackwood Industries. He'd seen that name recently in Jennifer's environmental law work, though he couldn't remember the context. More disturbing was what he found near the water's edge: a tranquilizer dart, recently used, with traces of a drug he recognized from his veterinary days. Someone had drugged Dakota, fitted him with this torture device, and released him to die slowly in the river. As Marcus examined the evidence, Dakota brought him something that made his hands shake, a large salmon, freshly caught, laid at his feet like an offering. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly intentional, that Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. "Someone did this to you on purpose," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "But why? Who would do such a thing?" Dakota's response was to move closer, resting his massive head against Marcus's leg, a gesture of trust that would have seemed impossible an hour ago. But as Marcus looked into those intelligent eyes, he saw something that chilled him more than the icy river water: fear. Whatever had been done to Dakota was just the beginning of something much worse. 3 days after the river rescue, Marcus sat in Sheriff Coleman's cramped office, the recovered collar weighing heavy in his weathered hands. The device looked even more sinister under the harsh fluorescent lights, a masterpiece of cruelty disguised as technology. Coleman, a thick-set man in his 50s, with eyes that never quite met Marcus's, barely glanced at the evidence. "Probably just some university research project, Marcus," Coleman said dismissively, leaning back in his chair with practiced indifference. "You know how these college kids are, always coming up with new ways to study wildlife behavior." Marcus felt his temper flare. "Tom, I've worked with research equipment for 40 years. This thing weighs 20 pounds and has barbed edges designed to cut into the animal's neck. No legitimate researcher would use torture devices." "Now you're getting a bit dramatic, don't you think?" Coleman's tone carried a warning that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Maybe you should stick to what you know best, treating sick puppies and staying out of law enforcement business." The dismissal stung, but Marcus pressed on. "I called my old colleague at the University of Montana's wildlife program. They've never seen anything like this collar. The electronics alone would cost $50,000, way beyond any research budget." Coleman's face hardened. "Marcus, you're a grieving widower who spends too much time alone in the woods. Sometimes isolation can make a man see conspiracies where there ain't none. Why don't you go home, take your heart medication, and let the professionals handle this?" The conversation ended with Marcus feeling more frustrated than when he'd arrived. But as he walked to his truck, something Coleman had said nagged at him. How did the sheriff know about his heart medication? Marcus had never mentioned his health issues to anyone in town. That evening, Dakota appeared at Marcus's cabin as if summoned by some invisible signal. The massive bear had been visiting daily since the rescue, bringing offerings of fish and sitting quietly by the porch as if standing guard. Tonight felt different. Dakota seemed agitated, pacing and huffing with obvious distress. "What is it, old friend?" Marcus asked, stepping onto the porch. "Something's got you spooked." Dakota's response was immediate and alarming. The bear led Marcus into the woods behind the cabin, stopping at a cluster of ancient pines where something hung from the lower branches. Marcus's flashlight revealed a horror that made his stomach lurch. 3 bear carcasses, expertly gutted, their organs removed with surgical precision. The bodies had been there for weeks, judging by the decomposition. "Sweet Jesus," Marcus whispered, fighting nausea. This wasn't the work of natural predators or even poachers looking for meat. Someone had harvested these bears for their internal organs with the skill of a trained veterinarian. Dakota led him to 2 more sites over the next hour, each revealing the same grisly evidence. 7 bears in total, all adult males, all butchered with professional efficiency. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was systematic, organized, and profitable. Bear organs were worth thousands of dollars on the black market, particularly in Asian traditional medicine circles. When they returned to the cabin, Marcus found his front door standing open. His blood turned to ice. He'd locked it before following Dakota into the woods. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, but everything felt violated. Drawers had been carefully searched and replaced, papers shuffled through, his computer moved slightly from its usual position. The message was clear. Someone had been watching, and they wanted him to know it. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Marcus hadn't heard Jennifer's voice in 6 months, and the sound of it made his chest tighten with emotion. "Dad?" Her voice was strained, uncertain. I need to talk to you about something. It's about Mom." "Jenny?" Marcus sank into Sarah's chair, hardly believing his ears. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I've been working on an environmental case here in Seattle, and one of the companies involved is Blackwood Industries. Dad, I think they might be connected to the water contamination that might have caused Mom's cancer." The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. "Jennifer, listen to me carefully. Don't talk about this on the phone. How quickly can you get to Montana?" "What? Dad, what's going on? You sound scared." Marcus looked out his window where Dakota sat in the tree line, massive and vigilant. "I found something, Jenny. Something bad. And I think whoever's behind it knows that I know." There was a long pause before Jennifer spoke again, her voice softer now. "Dad, I've been investigating Blackwood for months. They have subsidiaries involved in everything from logging to pharmaceutical imports. If you've stumbled onto something related to them, they're killing bears, Jenny, harvesting their organs. I've got evidence." Another pause, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her lawyer's training was evident in her controlled tone. "Dad, if that's true, then you're in serious danger. These people don't mess around when it comes to protecting their operations." That evening, as Marcus sat on his porch with Dakota nearby, his phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown, but something told him to answer. "Mr. Thornfield," a cold, unfamiliar voice said, "you've been asking too many questions. Stop. Now." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows where your daughter lives. Someone who knows your granddaughter walks to school alone every morning. Someone who would hate to see anything happen to them because an old man couldn't mind his own business." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the phone with shaking hands. Dakota seemed to sense his distress, moving closer to the porch and fixing those intelligent eyes on the surrounding forest. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt truly afraid. But beneath the fear was something else, a spark of the old fight that had made him one of the most respected veterinarians in Montana. They'd made a mistake threatening his family. Now it was personal. 1 week after the rescue, Marcus had settled into a routine that felt both familiar and miraculous. Every morning at dawn, Dakota would emerge from the forest like a gentle giant returning home, his massive form moving through the trees with surprising grace for an animal weighing nearly 900 pounds. The bear had grown even larger during his recovery, his thick coat gleaming with health. But it was his eyes that showed the most remarkable change. No longer haunted by trauma, they held the peaceful intelligence of a creature who had found sanctuary. "Morning, boy," Marcus called softly from his porch, settling into the reinforced chair Jennifer had insisted on buying after witnessing Dakota's first visit. The bear approached with his characteristic rumble, a sound that had become Marcus's favorite way to start each day. Dakota would settle beside the chair, his bulk taking up most of the deck space, and they would sit together in comfortable silence as the Montana wilderness awakened around them. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that Marcus noticed Dakota's behavior becoming increasingly agitated. The bear kept looking toward a specific section of forest, his ears flicking forward with obvious concern. When Dakota stood and began walking toward the tree line, Marcus followed without hesitation. What Dakota showed him changed everything Marcus thought he knew about the scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered. Hidden deep in the forest, accessible only through game trails that no human would normally find, lay a horrific tableau. that made Marcus's veterinary stomach turn. 3 bear carcasses hung from thick branches, expertly gutted with surgical precision. The bodies had been there for weeks, judging by the decomposition, but what made the scene truly horrifying was the obvious skill involved in the butchering. Someone with medical training had harvested these animals' organs with the efficiency of a trained surgeon. "Sweet Jesus," Marcus whispered, fighting waves of nausea. This wasn't the work of natural predators or even typical poachers looking for meat or pelts. Someone had systematically murdered these magnificent creatures for their internal organs, leaving the valuable fur and meat to rot in the wilderness. Dakota led him to 2 more sites over the next hour, each revealing similar evidence of organized slaughter. 7 bears in total, all adult males in their prime, all butchered with the same professional efficiency. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was systematic, profitable, and had been going on for much longer than anyone realized. When they returned to the cabin, Marcus's hands shook as he tried to process what he'd witnessed. Dakota seemed to understand his distress, pressing his massive head against Marcus's leg in a gesture of comfort that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks before. The sound of a car on the forest road interrupted his dark thoughts. Marcus's heart leaped as he recognized Jennifer's rental car, dust trailing behind it as she navigated the rough mountain track. But his joy turned to concern when he saw how quickly she was driving. Something was wrong. Jennifer emerged from the car before it had fully stopped, her usually professional composure cracked with urgency. Behind her, 12-year-old Emma climbed out more slowly, her eyes wide with the excitement of her first trip to Montana, but also showing the strain of whatever crisis had brought them here so suddenly. "Dad!" Jennifer called, her voice carrying a mix of emotions Marcus hadn't heard since she was Emma's age. Relief, fear, love, and something else, a desperate need for reconciliation that made his chest tighten. The reunion was everything Marcus had hoped for and feared it would be. Emma threw herself into his arms with the uninhibited affection of childhood, while Jennifer held back, years of hurt and misunderstanding creating an invisible barrier between them. "I came to tell you something," Jennifer said finally, her lawyer's training helping her maintain composure even as her voice trembled. "About Mom's medical bills. Dad, they've been financially devastating. I had to remortgage the house, take out loans. I thought you should know before—" "Before what?" Marcus asked gently. "Before I lost everything trying to pay them off." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For 2 years, he'd been anonymously sending every spare dollar to the hospital's billing department, thinking he was helping clear Sarah's debt. He'd never told Jennifer, never wanted her to feel obligated or guilty about the money. His own heart medication had been rationed, pills cut in half to make the prescription last, all so he could send more money to honor Sarah's memory. "Jenny," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been paying those bills, every month for 2 years, anonymous payments through the hospital's charitable fund. You shouldn't owe anything." The revelation broke the dam of resentment Jennifer had been carrying. Tears she'd held back for months finally came, and Marcus found himself holding both his daughter and granddaughter as years of misunderstanding melted away in the Montana sunshine. "I thought you'd abandoned us," Jennifer whispered against his shoulder. "After Mom died, you just disappeared into this wilderness. I thought you didn't care anymore." "I cared too much," Marcus replied, stroking her hair like he had when she was Emma's age. "I couldn't bear the empty house, all those memories, but I never stopped loving you, never stopped trying to help in the only way I knew how." Emma, caught between the 2 adults she loved most, looked up at her grandfather with wisdom beyond her years. "Grandpa, Mom always said you had a good heart under all that stubborn." Maybe it's time we all stopped looking for the stubborn and started seeing the heart. The family reconciliation was interrupted by Dakota's approach. Emma's eyes went wide as the massive bear emerged from the forest, but instead of fear, her face showed wonder and careful respect. "That's him," she breathed. "That's Dakota, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, watching carefully as his granddaughter approached the enormous animal with the fearless curiosity of youth. Dakota, for his part, seemed to understand that this small human was precious to Marcus. The bear lowered his massive head and allowed Emma to gently touch his fur, a gesture of trust that left all three humans speechless. "He's beautiful," Emma whispered, "and so gentle. How could anyone want to hurt him?" It was Jennifer who answered, her environmental lawyer instincts kicking in as she processed what Marcus had discovered. "Because someone's making money from it. Dad, what you found here, it's exactly what I've been investigating in Seattle. Blackwood Industries has subsidiaries involved in everything from logging to pharmaceutical imports. If they're harvesting bear organs for the Asian traditional medicine market—" "How much money are we talking about?" Marcus asked. Jennifer's expression grew grim. "Bear bile alone sells for $40,000 per pound in some markets. A single adult male bear could provide organs worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. If they're systematically harvesting bears across multiple states—" The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What Marcus had initially thought was an isolated incident of animal cruelty was actually part of an international trafficking network worth millions of dollars. "We have to stop them," Emma said with the moral clarity that only children possess. "They're murdering Dakota's family." As if summoned by their conversation, Dakota's behavior suddenly changed. The bear's ears flicked forward, his massive head turning toward sounds the humans couldn't detect. He let out a low, warning growl that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand up. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked. But Dakota was already moving toward the forest edge, his body language screaming danger. The answer came in the form of 3 black SUVs moving fast along the mountain road, their tinted windows and aggressive driving suggesting this wasn't a tourist convoy. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he realized they'd been found. "Get inside," he told Jennifer and Emma urgently. "Now!" But it was too late. The vehicles had already reached the cabin, and armed men in tactical gear were emerging before the engines stopped running. Marcus counted at least 8 men, all carrying military-style weapons and moving with the precision of professionals. The lead figure removed his helmet, revealing a face Marcus recognized from Jennifer's environmental case files. William Blackwood himself had come to handle this situation personally. "Dr. Marcus Thornfield," Blackwood called out, his voice carrying the cultured authority of corporate power. "We need to talk." Dakota positioned himself between the armed men and the family, his massive frame radiating protective fury. The bear's transformation from gentle companion to apex predator was terrifying to witness. Nearly 900 pounds of muscle and claw, fur standing on end, dark eyes blazing with primal rage. "Call off your pet, Doctor," Blackwood said, gesturing to his men. "My associates are excellent shots, and I'd hate for this to end badly for everyone involved." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Dakota and the guns. "What do you want, Blackwood?" "What I've always wanted, to save children's lives. Dr. Thornfield, you've stumbled into something much larger than your simple mind can comprehend. We're not poachers or common criminals. We're conducting vital medical research that could revolutionize cancer treatment." "By torturing innocent animals?" Blackwood's laugh was cold. "Innocent, Doctor. These are wild animals. Dangerous predators that kill livestock and threaten human safety. We're simply repurposing them for the greater good. One bear's organs can provide traditional medicine ingredients that save dozens of human lives." Emma stepped out from behind her mother, her 12-year-old voice cutting through the mountain air with stunning clarity. That's what every monster says when they want to justify being evil. Blackwood's expression darkened as he studied the child who had dared to challenge him. "And who might you be, little girl?" "I'm Emma, and that's my grandpa you're threatening. And that's Dakota, who's not a monster like you. He's family." The word family seemed to trigger something in Blackwood. His composed mask slipped, revealing raw pain underneath. "Family. Do you know what I would have given to save my family? My son died of leukemia when he was your age, little girl. Every treatment failed, every experimental drug, every desperate hope." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "So, you decided to play God?" "I decided to honor my son's memory." Traditional medicine, the kind your environmental regulations are destroying, might have saved him. Bare bile, bare bone, bare organs, these have been used for thousands of years to treat cancer. We've raised over $2 million for pediatric cancer research through our operations. The moral complexity of Blackwood's motivation hit Marcus like a physical force. This wasn't simple greed. It was grief twisted into something monstrous, a father's love perverted by loss and desperation. "William," Marcus said, using the man's first name deliberately, "I lost my wife to cancer, too. I know that pain, but grief doesn't give us the right to cause more suffering. Doesn't it?" Blackwood's voice cracked slightly. "How many children's lives is your precious bear's life worth? Dr. Thornfield? 10, 20, 100? Jennifer stepped forward, her legal training evident in her controlled tone. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been investigating your company for months. The water contamination from your logging operations likely contributed to my mother's cancer. How many people have died because of your greater good?" The revelation hung in the mountain air like a thunderclap. Blackwood's empire of suffering extended far beyond wildlife trafficking. His environmental crimes had potentially killed the very woman whose husband now stood between him and his next victims. Dakota seemed to sense the emotional intensity of the moment. The massive bear's protective stance never wavered, but his intelligent eyes remained fixed on Blackwood, as if he understood that this man represented everything wrong with humanity's relationship to the natural world. "Enough philosophy," Blackwood said finally, his corporate mask sliding back into place. "Dr. Thornfield, you have two choices. Walk away from this, take your family back to Seattle and forget what you've seen. Or watch them suffer the consequences of your stubborn heroism." Emma's small hand slipped into Marcus's weathered one. "Grandpa, sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing." Looking down at his granddaughter's trusting face, Marcus felt something Sarah had once told him echo in his memory. "The measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, Marcus. It's what he's willing to sacrifice for what matters most." "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had finally found his purpose, "I've been a veterinarian for 40 years. My job has always been to protect creatures that can't protect themselves. I'm not stopping now." The confrontation began at dawn on July 28th, exactly 48 hours before hunting season would open and make Dakota a legal target. Marcus had spent the sleepless night preparing for what he knew would be his final stand, checking and rechecking the evidence Jennifer had compiled, saying goodbye to Sarah's photograph, and making peace with the possibility that he might not survive the day. Jennifer and Emma had arrived from Seattle 3 days earlier, their rental car loaded with legal documents and camping gear. The reunion had been emotional. 12-year-old Emma throwing herself into her grandfather's arms while Jennifer held back tears, finally seeing the toll grief and isolation had taken on the man who'd once seemed invincible. "Dad, you look like you've aged 10 years, Jennifer had whispered during their first private moment. "Losing your mother will do that to a man," Marcus had replied. "But finding you again might just save what's left of me." Now, as the family crouched behind fallen logs at the edge of Blackwood's hidden facility, those words felt prophetic. Emma clutched her grandfather's hand, her young face pale but determined. She'd insisted on coming despite her mother's protests, arguing with wisdom beyond her years. If Grandpa's going to save Dakota, he needs all the family he's got. The facility itself was a nightmare of efficiency hidden deep in the forest. A complex of prefabricated buildings connected by covered walkways, with holding pens for captured bears and what appeared to be a processing plant for harvesting organs. The smell of death and industrial disinfectant hung heavy in the morning air. "My God," Jennifer breathed, her lawyer's composure cracking as she filmed everything with her phone. "This is bigger than we thought." "They're not just killing wild bears, they're breeding them for slaughter." Marcus counted at least 20 bears in various holding pens, all fitted with the same brutal collars he'd removed from Dakota. The animals moved with the listless despair of creatures who'd given up hope, their magnificent spirits broken by captivity and systematic abuse. Dakota had led them here through game trails known only to wildlife, moving with the stealth of a natural predator despite his massive size. Now the bear waited in the tree line, his intelligent eyes fixed on the facility where his fellow creatures suffered. "The guards change shifts at 8, Marcus whispered, checking his watch. "That gives us 15 minutes to get close enough to document everything before." A twig snapped behind them. Marcus spun around to find Sheriff Coleman emerging from the brush, his service weapon drawn and pointing directly at Emma's chest. "Well, well," Coleman drawled, his earlier pretense of incompetence replaced by cold calculation. "The whole family's here for the show. How touching." Jennifer instinctively moved to shield her daughter, but Coleman's gun followed her movement. "Don't be stupid, counselor. You've already caused enough trouble with your environmental lawsuit. Time to end this little crusade." "Tom, what the hell are you doing?" Marcus demanded, though part of him had suspected Coleman's involvement for days. "My job, Marcus. My very well-paying job." Coleman's smile was ugly in the morning light. "You think a sheriff's salary covers my kids' college tuition? Blackwood Industries has been good to me, and I ain't about to let some sentimental old fool ruin a profitable partnership." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the forest, 3 black SUVs moving fast along the facility's access road. Marcus felt his heart skip as he recognized the lead vehicle. William Blackwood himself had come to oversee their capture personally. "Run," Marcus whispered to Jennifer. "Take Emma and run. I'm not leaving you, Dad. You have to. Someone needs to tell this story." But escape was already impossible. Blackwood's security team had surrounded their position with military precision, automatic weapons trained on the family from multiple angles. Coleman gestured for them to stand, his own weapon never wavering. "Move toward the facility, slowly, and don't even think about calling for help. We're jamming all cell signals within 5 miles. As they walked toward the complex of buildings, Marcus caught sight of Dakota in his peripheral vision. The massive bear was following at a distance, using the thick forest cover to remain hidden. For a moment, Marcus felt a surge of hope. But what could one animal do against armed men? Blackwood waited for them inside the main building, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness setting. His eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who'd learned to disguise his true nature behind corporate respectability. "Dr. Thornfield," Blackwood said with mock courtesy. "I've heard so much about you. The veterinarian who couldn't save his own wife but thinks he can save every wounded animal in Montana." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he forced himself to remain steady. "At least I don't torture innocent creatures for profit." "Profit?" Blackwood's laugh was genuinely amused. "You think this is about money? Dr. Thornfield, everything we do here serves a higher purpose. Bear bile, bone, and organs save human lives. Traditional medicine that's worked for thousands of years. One bear's organs can provide treatment for dozens of cancer patients. By that logic, you should volunteer yourself for harvest, Jennifer shot back. I'm sure your organs could save several lives. Blackwood's expression darkened. My son died of leukemia when he was 14, Ms. Walsh. Every treatment, every experimental drug, every desperate hope, all failures of modern medicine. But traditional remedies, the kind your environmental regulations are destroying, might have saved him. So you decided to play God? Marcus demanded. I decided to honor my son's memory by ensuring other children don't suffer his fate. We've raised over $2 million for pediatric cancer research through our operations here. How many children's lives is your precious bear's life worth, Dr. Thornfield? The moral complexity of Blackwood's argument might have given Marcus pause under other circumstances, but the sight of the tortured animals in their cages had steeled his resolve. Grief doesn't give you the right to murder, William. I lost my wife to cancer too, but I didn't turn into a monster. No, you just turned into a bitter old man hiding in the woods, Blackwood replied. At least I'm doing something constructive with my pain. The philosophical debate was interrupted by a commotion outside, shouts of alarm from the security team and the sound of metal crashing against metal. Through the window, Marcus saw Dakota's massive form charging through the facility's outer perimeter, his 800-pound bulk smashing through chain-link fencing like tissue paper. Jesus Christ, how big is that thing? One of the guards shouted over the radio. Blackwood's composure cracked for the first time. Shoot it! Shoot the damn thing before it destroys everything. But Dakota wasn't attacking randomly. With terrifying intelligence, the bear was systematically destroying the facility's infrastructure, overturning vehicles, smashing electrical panels, and most importantly, breaking open the holding pens to free the captive bears. He's not just rescuing himself, Emma whispered in awe. He's rescuing all of them. The building shook as Dakota's massive paws hammered against the main entrance. The steel door, designed to keep bears in, proved inadequate to keep one determined Kodiak out. With a sound like thunder, the door buckled and collapsed inward. Dakota filled the doorway, his fur standing on end, his dark eyes blazing with primal fury. But when his gaze found Marcus, the bear's expression softened almost imperceptibly, a moment of recognition and trust that transcended species. "Shoot it!" Blackwood screamed at his guards, but the men hesitated, awed by the magnificent creature's presence and confused by the tactical situation. That moment of hesitation was all Dakota needed. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling beams, the massive bear charged directly at Blackwood, 800 pounds of muscle and righteous fury focused on the man who'd tortured his kind. Blackwood stumbled backward, pulling a pistol from his jacket, but his hands shook with terror. The shot went wide, the bullet embedding itself in the wooden wall inches from Jennifer's head. Marcus moved without thinking, his veterinarian's instincts overriding his fear. He stepped between Dakota and Blackwood, raising his hands in the universal gesture of surrender that he'd used with panicked animals for 40 years. "Easy, big fella," Marcus said, his voice somehow steady despite the chaos. "I know you want to hurt him, but this isn't the way. We're better than them." Dakota stopped inches from Blackwood's cowering form, his massive head turning toward Marcus with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity. For a heartbeat, the facility fell silent except for the sound of terrified breathing. Then Dakota did something that would haunt Marcus's dreams and warm his heart for the rest of his life. The great bear gently pressed his forehead against Marcus's chest, a gesture of trust and farewell that spoke volumes about the bond they'd forged. But the moment of peace shattered as Coleman raised his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. "Enough of this Disney bullshit," he snarled. The gunshot echoed through the building like thunder. The gunshot's echo seemed to hang in the air forever, a sound that would replay in Marcus's nightmares for months to come. Dakota's massive body staggered, dark blood spreading across his thick fur as Coleman's bullet found its mark. The great bear's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto his side with a thud that shook the building's foundation. "No!" Emma's scream pierced the silence, her 12-year-old voice breaking with anguish as she witnessed the fall of the magnificent creature who had become her hero. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Dakota, his veterinary training taking over even as his heart shattered. The bullet had struck the bear's shoulder, missing the vital organs but causing massive trauma and blood loss. Dakota's breathing was labored, his dark eyes glazing over as shock set in. "Hold on, old friend," Marcus whispered, his hands pressing against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Don't you give up on me now." "Not after everything we've been through." Jennifer pulled Emma close, both of them crying as they watched Marcus work desperately to save the bear who had risked everything to save them. The contrast was stark. In a building designed for systematic killing, a retired veterinarian fought to preserve one precious life with the same dedication he'd shown throughout his career. "Touching," Blackwood said coldly, having recovered his composure. "But ultimately pointless. The animal is dying, Doctor, just like everything else you've tried to save. Some battles simply can't be won." Coleman holstered his weapon with satisfaction. "Problem solved. Now we can clean up this mess and get back to business." But Dakota's apparent death had unleashed something Marcus didn't expect: the other bears. The captive animals Dakota had freed were no longer cowering in their broken pens. They had gathered outside the building, drawn by the scent of their liberator's blood and the sound of his distress. A low, rumbling chorus of growls filled the air as nearly 20 bears surrounded the facility. "What the hell?" one of Blackwood's guards muttered, backing away from the windows as massive shapes moved in the early morning shadows. Marcus felt Dakota's breathing grow weaker, each breath a struggle that seemed destined to be his last. The bear's eyes found his, and in that gaze Marcus saw something that broke his heart. Forgiveness. Even dying from a human's bullet, Dakota held no anger, only the same trust and affection he'd shown since their reunion at the river. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm so damn sorry, boy. I couldn't save Sarah, and now I can't save you either." Emma broke free from her mother's embrace and knelt beside her grandfather, her small hands joining his in applying pressure to Dakota's wound. "Don't give up, Grandpa. Remember what you told me about Grandma. Sometimes the best we can do is be there for someone when they're scared." The simple wisdom of his granddaughter's words hit Marcus like lightning. He wasn't failing Dakota by being unable to stop the bleeding. He was honoring their friendship by refusing to let the great bear die alone and afraid. "That's right, Emma," Marcus said, his voice steadying as he found purpose in the midst of tragedy. "We're here with you, Dakota. You're not alone." But even as Marcus spoke the words of comfort, he felt Dakota's pulse growing weaker under his hands. The massive chest rose and fell in increasingly shallow breaths, and the intelligent eyes that had shown such warmth and understanding began to lose their focus. Marcus's own heart began to flutter irregularly, the stress and exertion combining with his rationed medication to trigger the cardiac episode he'd been dreading. Sharp pain shot down his left arm as his vision blurred, and he realized with grim irony that he and Dakota might be dying together. "Dad!" Jennifer's voice seemed to come from far away as Marcus swayed, his hand moving instinctively to his chest. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Heart," Marcus gasped, feeling his legs give way. He collapsed beside Dakota, his breathing becoming as labored as the bear's. The medication he'd been cutting in half to make it last longer simply wasn't enough for this level of stress. Emma looked back and forth between her grandfather and the dying bear, her young mind struggling to process the double tragedy unfolding before her eyes. "Mom, do something! They're both dying!" Jennifer knelt beside her father, checking his pulse with the efficiency she'd learned in law school first aid classes. His heartbeat was erratic and weak, his skin pale and clammy with the unmistakable signs of cardiac distress. "He needs a hospital," she told Blackwood urgently. "Now." Blackwood's laugh was cruel. "The nearest hospital is 2 hours away, and we're not exactly in a position to call for help. Your father made his choice when he decided to interfere with our operation." "You're talking about murder," Jennifer said, her lawyer's training helping her maintain composure even as her world crumbled around her. "I'm talking about natural consequences," Blackwood replied. "Old men with heart conditions shouldn't play hero in the wilderness." Coleman checked his watch with callous indifference. "How long do you think it'll take them both to die? I need to know when we can start cleaning up this mess." Emma suddenly stood up, her young face transformed by a fury that reminded Marcus powerfully of her grandmother, Sarah. "You're evil," she said, her voice carrying a strength that belied her age. "My grandpa saved that bear because it was the right thing to do, and now you're just going to watch them both die because you're too scared and greedy to be decent human beings." "Emma," Jennifer warned, but her daughter wasn't finished. "My mom's been recording everything on her phone," Emma announced, pulling Jennifer's device from her pocket. "Every word you've said, every threat you've made. And she set it to automatically upload to the cloud, so even if you kill us, everyone will know what you've done." Blackwood's face went white as he realized the implications. A recording of his confession, combined with video evidence of the illegal facility, would destroy not just his operation, but his entire corporate empire. "Give me that phone," Coleman snarled, reaching for the device. But Emma was quicker, tossing the phone to her mother while positioning herself protectively over her grandfather's prone form. "No! You want to hurt my family? You'll have to go through me." As if summoned by the child's defiant stand, the sound of approaching helicopters began to echo through the valley. Jennifer looked up with sudden hope. She recognized the distinctive rhythm of law enforcement aircraft. "Federal agents," she said with grim satisfaction. "I sent them our GPS coordinates before we left the cabin this morning, along with copies of all our evidence. They were supposed to wait for my signal, but I guess they got tired of waiting." Blackwood's empire was crumbling around him, but as Marcus felt his consciousness fading, he couldn't find satisfaction in their victory. Dakota's breathing had stopped altogether, and his own heart was giving out. They had won the battle, but lost what mattered most. The last thing Marcus saw before darkness claimed him was Emma's tear-streaked face, and the last thing he heard was her voice, strong and clear. "Don't leave us, Grandpa. Please don't leave us." The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors pulled Marcus back from the edge of oblivion 3 days later. His first conscious thought was of Dakota. The image of the great bear's dying eyes burned into his memory like a brand. His second was the crushing weight of failure that had become as familiar as breathing since Sarah's death. "Dad?" Jennifer's voice, soft and hopeful, came from somewhere to his left. "Can you hear me?" Marcus tried to speak, but found his throat raw and constricted. A breathing tube had been removed recently, leaving him feeling like he'd swallowed broken glass. When he finally managed to croak out words, they carried all the anguish of his shattered heart. "Dakota?" The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling tears leak down his weathered cheeks. Another life lost on his watch. Another failure to add to the growing pile that had started with Sarah's cancer diagnosis. "Grandpa, don't cry." Emma's voice was closer now, her small hand slipping into his. "Please don't cry." "I couldn't save him, sweetheart," Marcus whispered. "Just like I couldn't save your grandmother. I'm just a tired old man who can't protect the things that matter." "That's not true," Jennifer said firmly, and something in her tone made Marcus open his eyes. She was holding a tablet, and her face showed an expression he hadn't seen since she was Emma's age. Pure, undiluted excitement. "Dad, you need to see this. The whole world needs to see this." She angled the tablet so he could view the screen, and what Marcus saw made his heart stutter for reasons that had nothing to do with his medical condition. It was a news report from CNN, and the headline read, "Heroic Bear Saves Family, Exposes Wildlife Trafficking Ring." But it was the video footage that stopped his breath entirely. Shot from one of the facility's security cameras, it showed Dakota's final charge, but not his death. Instead, the timestamp revealed something impossible. The video continued for several minutes after Marcus had lost consciousness. "Keep watching," Emma said, her voice bubbling with excitement. The security footage showed Joseph Running Bear, the tribal veterinarian, emerging from the forest with two other men just moments after the federal helicopters had landed. While agents arrested Blackwood and Coleman, Running Bear had gone straight to Dakota's motionless form. The video showed him performing emergency field surgery, his skilled hands working to stop the bleeding and stabilize the wounded bear. Joseph told us later that he'd been tracking the operation for months, Jennifer explained, her voice thick with emotion. When he heard the gunshot, he knew someone was in trouble. He brought a complete veterinary kit, including blood expanders and antibiotics. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the video showed Dakota's chest beginning to rise and fall more steadily under Running Bear's treatment. The great bear was alive, unconscious, and severely wounded, but alive. "Where is he now?" Marcus asked, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "That's the best part," Emma said, practically bouncing in her chair. "Mr. Running Bear has a wildlife sanctuary on tribal land. Dakota's been recovering there, and guess what? He's been asking for you." "Asking for me?" Jennifer smiled through her tears. "According to Joseph, Dakota refuses to eat unless someone mentions your name first. He keeps looking toward the road that leads to town, like he's waiting for something. Joseph says he's never seen a wild animal show such specific attachment to a human being." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical force. In his darkest moment, convinced that he'd failed again, the truth was exactly the opposite. Dakota was alive because of the bond they'd forged, because Running Bear had known the bear was worth saving, because Marcus's initial act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that saved not just one life, but dozens. "There's more," Jennifer continued, scrolling to another news article. "Remember how I was investigating Blackwood Industries for environmental violations? Well, it turns out our little adventure provided the missing pieces to a federal case that's been building for 2 years. The article detailed the scope of Blackwood's operation, not just bear harvesting, but illegal logging, water contamination, and systematic corruption of local officials. The evidence Jennifer had gathered, combined with the recordings from their confrontation, had brought down an entire criminal network. "The water contamination case, Dad. The one that might have contributed to Mom's cancer." "Yeah, we got them. Blackwood Industries is facing $50 million in fines and cleanup costs. The settlement money is going to fund cancer research and environmental restoration projects." Marcus felt a strange sensation in his chest. Not the painful flutter of cardiac distress, but something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Hope. "Your mother would be proud," he whispered. "She would be proud of all of us," Jennifer corrected. "But especially you. Dad, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? The rescue video has been viewed 20 million times. People are calling Dakota the guardian bear of Montana. There's already legislation being introduced to strengthen wildlife protection laws." Emma pulled out her own phone, showing Marcus a social media feed that made his eyes widen. Messages of support were pouring in from around the world, children's drawings of him and Dakota, donations to wildlife conservation groups, and thousands of comments praising his courage. "Look at this one, Grandpa," Emma said, reading from the screen. My grandfather was also a veterinarian who loved animals. Watching Marcus Thornfield risk his life for that bear reminded me that there are still heroes in the world. Thank you for not giving up. Marcus wiped his eyes, overwhelmed by the outpouring of response. I just did what felt right in the moment. That's what makes you a hero, Jennifer said softly. Heroes don't think about the consequences. They just act when someone needs help. A knock on the hospital room door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's cardiologist, entered with a smile that immediately eased his concerns about his prognosis. "Well, Mr. Thornfield, you've certainly made my job interesting," Dr. Chen said, checking his chart. "When they brought you in, your heart was in severe distress from stress and inadequate medication. But I have good news. The damage was minimal, and with proper medication management, you should make a full recovery." "Proper medication management?" Marcus asked. Dr. Chen's expression became serious. "Mr. Thornfield, your daughter told me you've been rationing your heart medication due to financial constraints. That's incredibly dangerous and completely unnecessary. There are assistance programs, generic alternatives, and frankly, given what you've accomplished, I suspect funding won't be an issue much longer." Jennifer squeezed his hand. "Dad, I've been doing some research. The anonymous payments you've been making on Mom's medical bills? The hospital has a record of every transaction. Between that documentation and the media attention from this story, several pharmaceutical companies have reached out offering to cover your medication costs permanently." "They want to sponsor me?" Marcus asked, bewildered. "They want to honor you," Emma corrected. "There's a difference." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Your granddaughter is wise. Mr. Thornfield, you've become a symbol of something this country needs, the courage to do what's right regardless of personal cost. That kind of moral leadership is rare, and people want to support it." Another knock interrupted them, and Joseph Running Bear entered the room carrying a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. His weathered face bore a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Marcus Thornfield," Running Bear said in his deep, measured voice, "I bring greetings from a mutual friend." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal something that made Marcus's heart soar. A large pine cone, polished smooth by handling, with what appeared to be claw marks carved into its surface in a deliberate pattern. "Dakota made this for you," Running Bear explained. "Spent 3 days working on it with his claws while he recovered. He won't eat, won't rest properly, won't interact with the other rescued bears. And he just sits by the sanctuary fence, working on this gift and watching the road." Marcus took the pine cone with trembling hands, feeling the smooth grooves Dakota had carved with such care. The pattern wasn't random, it was clearly deliberate, almost like primitive writing. "What does it mean?" Emma asked, fascinated. Running Bear smiled. "In our tradition, when a bear gifts a human with something they've made, it means they consider that person family. Dakota isn't just thanking you, Marcus. He's claiming you as his own." Jennifer wiped away fresh tears. "Dad, you didn't just save a bear. You gained a son." The emotional weight of the revelation was interrupted by yet another knock. This time, it was a young nurse carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers and a stack of cards and letters that reached her chin. "Mr. Thornfield," the nurse said, slightly out of breath, "these are just from today's delivery. We've had to set up a separate room just for your mail and gifts. And there are 3 news crews in the lobby requesting interviews." Marcus looked around the room at his daughter, granddaughter, and new friend, then down at the pine cone Dakota had crafted with such care. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt truly alive. "Tell the news crews they can wait," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "I have a family reunion to attend first. It's time I went to see my boy." 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Marcus Thornfield stood on the porch of his newly renovated cabin, watching his breath form clouds in the Montana air. The cabin looked different now. Larger windows to let in more light, a ramp Jennifer had insisted on for his heart condition, and most importantly, a reinforced deck that could support the weight of very large visitors. Dakota emerged from the tree line as he did every morning, his massive form moving with the quiet grace that never failed to amaze Marcus. The bear's shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a small scar hidden beneath his thick winter coat. But more than his physical recovery, it was Dakota's eyes that showed the deepest healing. No longer haunted by trauma, they held the peaceful contentment of an animal who knew he was safe and loved. "Morning, boy," Marcus called softly, settling into the sturdy wooden chair Jennifer had bought specifically for these daily visits. Dakota approached with his characteristic gentle rumble, a sound that had become Marcus's favorite way to start each day. The bear had grown even larger during his recovery, now weighing close to 900 pounds of pure muscle and contentment. Joseph Running Bear had initially worried about releasing such a habituated animal back into the wild, but Dakota had solved that problem himself by choosing to live freely in the forest while maintaining his daily visits to Marcus's cabin. "You know, old friend," Marcus said, scratching behind Dakota's ears in the spot that never failed to make the massive bear lean into his touch like an oversized dog, "I got a letter from Emma yesterday. She started a wildlife club at her school in Seattle, calls it Dakota's Rangers." Dakota's response was a contented huff as he settled beside Marcus's chair, his bulk taking up most of the deck space. The bear had developed an uncanny ability to sense Marcus's moods, appearing whenever the old man felt lonely or overwhelmed by the attention his story had generated. The media response had been unprecedented. The guardian bear of Montana had become an international sensation, spawning documentaries, children's books, and even a Hollywood movie deal that Marcus had politely declined. More importantly, it had led to the passage of the Dakota Wildlife Protection Act, federal legislation that strengthened penalties for wildlife trafficking and provided funding for rehabilitation programs. "Dad? You out here talking to yourself again?" Jennifer's voice carried from inside the cabin, where she was preparing breakfast for their expanded family. She'd moved permanently to Montana after Blackwood's conviction, opening a small environmental law practice that had quickly become the go-to firm for conservation cases throughout the region. "I'm talking to Dakota," Marcus called back. "And he's a better listener than most people." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, wearing the thick wool sweater and sturdy boots that had become her uniform since trading Seattle's corporate environment for Montana's rural charm. At 42, she looked happier and more relaxed than Marcus had seen her since childhood. "Emma's going to video call from school in an hour," Jennifer said, settling into the chair beside her father. "She wants to show Dakota her science project about bear intelligence." Dakota's ears perked up at the mention of Emma's name. The bond between the massive bear and Marcus's granddaughter had become legendary among the park rangers, who regularly witnessed Dakota's protective behavior whenever Emma visited. The bear seemed to understand that she was precious to Marcus and appointed himself her unofficial guardian during her stays at the cabin. "How's the foundation paperwork coming?" Marcus asked, referring to the Sarah Thornfield Memorial Wildlife Foundation they were establishing with money from the book and movie deals. "Almost finished," Jennifer replied with satisfaction. "We'll officially launch next month. The first grant recipients are 3 wildlife rehabilitation centers and a research program studying human-animal bonds. Mom would have loved that." Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar warmth that came with mentions of Sarah these days. The crushing grief had gradually transformed into something gentler, a sense of her continued presence in the good work they were doing in her memory. Speaking of the foundation, Jennifer continued, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "We got a donation letter that I think you'll want to see." Marcus opened the letter and felt his eyes widen as he read. It was from William Blackwood, written from federal prison, containing a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note. "Dr. Thornfield," the letter read, "I've had considerable time to reflect on my actions and their consequences. While I cannot undo the harm I caused, I want to contribute to the conservation work you're doing in your wife's memory. My son would have admired your courage, and I hope this donation can honor both his memory and the bears I wronged. Perhaps redemption is possible even for someone like me." Marcus folded the letter carefully, overwhelmed by the complexity of human nature and the power of genuine repentance. "Even Blackwood is trying to make amends." "People change," Jennifer observed. "Some for the worse, but some for the better. You taught me that." Dakota suddenly lifted his massive head, ears alert to sounds humans couldn't detect. Moments later, Joseph Running Bear's pickup truck came into view on the winding forest road. The tribal veterinarian had become a regular visitor, checking on Dakota's continued health and documenting the unprecedented relationship between man and bear for a research paper that was already generating excitement in the scientific community. "Time for your checkup, boy," Marcus told Dakota, who responded with what could only be described as a resigned sigh. As Running Bear approached with his medical bag, Marcus reflected on the miraculous chain of events that had brought them all together. A moment of compassion by a lonely widower had rippled outward to touch countless lives, create lasting change, and build a family bound not by blood but by shared purpose and love. "You know what the best part is?" Marcus said to Jennifer as they watched Dakota patiently submit to Running Bear's examination. "What's that, Dad?" Marcus smiled, feeling Sarah's presence in the warmth of the morning sun. "I've finally found a way to leave something good behind. Sometimes the most profound moments in life come when we think all hope is lost." Marcus Thornfield's story reminds us that it's never too late to discover our purpose, heal broken relationships, or make a difference that echoes far beyond our own lives. When grief and isolation threatened to define his remaining years, one act of compassion changed everything. Not just for him, but for his estranged family and countless others who witnessed his courage. The beautiful truth is that our greatest contributions often come from our deepest pain. Marcus couldn't save his beloved wife, Sarah, but that loss gave him the empathy to save Dakota and ultimately rebuild the precious bond with his daughter and granddaughter. His story proves that second chances exist at any stage of life, that family relationships can be restored, and that one person's willingness to do what's right can create ripples of positive change across the world. The legacy we leave isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by the love we share and the courage we show when it matters most. Every day offers us the opportunity to be someone's hero, to bridge a gap, or to heal a wound we thought was permanent. What moment in your life taught you that it's never too late for a fresh start? Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness that changed your perspective on what's possible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.